My name is Yvette, and I am 28 years old. 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out when my boyfriend Jake proposed to me after 3 wonderful years together. I was planning the perfect wedding, dreaming about our future, and believing I had found my soulmate. But sometimes love makes us do crazy things we never thought we would do. Sometimes our fears and insecurities can destroy the very thing we treasure most. I made a mistake that almost cost me everything. Before I share what happened that changed everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you have ever made a mistake in love and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you will want to hear how this unfolds, because what I discovered later made me question everything I thought I knew about trust. I met Jake 3 years ago at a little coffee shop downtown on 5th Street. It was one of those perfect autumn mornings when the leaves were just starting to turn golden, and I was running late for work as usual. I rushed in, ordered my usual vanilla latte, and somehow managed to bump right into this tall guy with the most genuine smile I had ever seen. He was 29, worked as a software engineer, and had this amazing sense of humor that could make me laugh even on my worst days. Our first date was at the Botanical Gardens, where we spent hours walking through the rose garden and talking about everything and nothing. Jake had this way of listening, really listening, that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. He remembered little details about things I said, like how I loved the smell of jasmine, or how I always ordered extra whipped cream on my hot chocolate. We fell into this comfortable rhythm of weekend trips to nearby towns, trying new restaurants, and staying up late watching old movies on his couch. Jake was the type of person who would surprise me with my favorite takeout when I had a rough day at work, or who would drive 20 minutes out of his way just to pick up those specific chocolate croissants I loved from the French bakery across town. After 2 years of dating, we decided to move in together. Jake helped me pack every single box from my studio apartment, and we spent our first night in our shared place eating pizza on the floor because we had not unpacked the dining table yet. He told me that night that I was his best friend, and I believed him completely. Jake was honest about everything from his student loan debt to his weird habit of organizing his sock drawer by color. I thought I knew everything about him. When Jake proposed last spring during a picnic in Central Park, I cried happy tears for what felt like hours. He had planned everything perfectly down to bringing my favorite strawberry champagne and having a photographer hidden behind the trees to capture the moment. The ring was exactly what I had dreamed of, a simple solitaire that caught the sunlight just right. I said yes before he could even finish asking the question. Wedding planning started immediately after our engagement, and I threw myself into it with the enthusiasm of someone who had been dreaming about their wedding day since childhood. I spent weekends browsing bridal magazines with my mom and my sister Sarah, scheduling appointments to tour venues and creating elaborate Pinterest boards with thousands of ideas for flowers, decorations, and color schemes. Jake was wonderful about it at first. He came with me to taste cakes at 3 different bakeries, helped me choose between the elegant ballroom downtown and the charming garden venue outside the city, and even had strong opinions about whether we should hire a DJ or a live band. We picked out a photographer together, a sweet older woman who had been shooting weddings for 30 years and promised to capture every special moment. But as the weeks passed, Jake started getting busier and busier with work. He began staying late at the office more often, sometimes not getting home until 8 or 9 at night when he used to be home by 6. When I asked about it, he would just say that his team was working on a major software update and that his boss was putting pressure on everyone to meet some important deadlines. At first, I tried to be understanding. I knew that Jake took his job seriously, and I respected his work ethic. But then the mysterious text messages started. His phone would buzz during dinner, and he would glance at it with this strange expression before putting it face down on the table. When I asked who was texting, he would give me vague answers like he was in a meeting or it was just work stuff. The phone calls were even stranger. Jake started taking calls outside on our balcony, speaking in low voices that I could not quite hear through the glass door. When he came back inside, he would seem distracted and distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. If I asked what the call was about, he would just say it was boring work stuff and change the subject. I started noticing other little changes too. Jake would come home and head straight for the shower instead of giving me his usual hug and asking about my day. One evening, I could have sworn I smelled a different perfume on his shirt, something floral and expensive that I had never worn. When I mentioned it, he looked confused and said he had been in elevators and conference rooms all day with different people. The breaking point started building when Jake missed our dinner date for the third time in 2 weeks. We had reservations at this little Italian place we both loved, and I had been looking forward to it all week. I was already seated at our usual table when he texted to say he had to work late on an urgent project. I sat there alone, making excuses to the waiter and feeling embarrassed and hurt. When I talked to my best friend Amanda about it, she tried to reassure me. She said that maybe I was overthinking things, that wedding planning was stressful for everyone, and that Jake was probably just dealing with work pressure. But I could not shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The man I thought I knew better than anyone was becoming a stranger, and I had no idea why. The weekend that changed everything started on a Friday evening when Jake announced he had to go on a last-minute business trip to Portland. He seemed nervous when he told me, avoiding eye contact and packing his bag unusually quickly. Something about it felt wrong, because Jake's company had a policy against weekend business trips unless there was a genuine emergency. I tried to ask him about the details, but his answers were vague and inconsistent. He said he had to meet with a potential client, but when I asked which client, he just said it was confidential and that he would tell me more when he got back. The whole conversation felt forced and uncomfortable, nothing like the easy communication we usually had. After Jake left for the airport, I could not stop thinking about how strange everything had been lately. My intuition was screaming that something was not right, so I decided to do something I had never done before. I drove to the hotel in Portland that Jake had mentioned, a nice place downtown that his company supposedly used for business trips. When I got to the front desk and asked if they had a reservation under Jake's name, the clerk checked her computer and told me there was nothing. She even checked under different spellings and his last name, but there was absolutely no record of him staying there that weekend. My heart started pounding as I realized he had lied to me about where he was going. I tried calling Jake, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying to sound casual, asking how his trip was going and saying I missed him. He did not call me back that night, and I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities of where he really was and who he might be with. Saturday morning, I drove back home early from my sister's house, where I had planned to spend the day. I needed to be in our apartment to look for answers to the questions that were eating me alive. When I got there, I found Jake's laptop still open on the kitchen counter. He had obviously left in such a hurry that he forgot to close it. I stared at the screen for a long time, knowing that looking through his computer would cross a line we had never crossed before. But my fear and suspicion were stronger than my respect for his privacy. I clicked through his browser history and found tabs for expensive jewelry websites, boutique florists in the city, and event planning services. My heart sank as I looked at the jewelry sites. There were engagement rings, necklaces, and bracelets that cost thousands of dollars. None of it was anything I had ever mentioned wanting, and we had already bought my engagement ring months ago. The only explanation I could think of was that he was shopping for someone else, buying gifts for another woman. The florist websites showed elaborate bouquet arrangements and exotic flowers that were nothing like the simple white roses and baby's breath we had chosen for our wedding. The event planning sites featured romantic dinner setups, couples spa packages, and intimate weekend getaways. Everything pointed to Jake planning romantic experiences, but not with me. Then I found the receipt. It was folded up in the pocket of the jacket Jake had worn to work on Tuesday, the night he said he was working late at the office. The receipt was from Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive French restaurants in the city, and it showed dinner for 2 people. The total was over $300 more than Jake and I had ever spent on a single meal together. The date on the receipt was from last Tuesday night, exactly when Jake had texted me that he was stuck in meetings and would not be home until late. I felt sick as I realized that while I was eating leftover Chinese food alone in our apartment, Jake had been having an expensive romantic dinner with someone else. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that made everything worse. The message said, "Everything set for next weekend. She will love it." I screenshot the message with shaking hands, feeling like I had just found the final piece of evidence that confirmed my worst fears. I called Amanda crying so hard I could barely speak. When I told her about the laptop, the receipt, and the mysterious text message, she was as shocked as I was. She said it definitely looked suspicious, and that I needed to confront Jake immediately when he got back from his fake business trip. The more I thought about it, the more all of Jake's recent behavior made perfect sense. The late nights at work were actually dates with another woman. The secretive phone calls were him making plans with her. The smell of unfamiliar perfume was because he had been close enough to her to get it on his clothes. I felt stupid for trusting him so completely and for believing all of his lies. I spent Saturday night packing some of my belongings into suitcases, preparing to move out if our confrontation went as badly as I expected it would. I rehearsed angry speeches about betrayal and wasted years planning exactly what I would say when I showed him all the evidence I had collected. Jake returned from his so-called Portland trip on Sunday evening with a genuine smile on his face and a small bag of coffee beans that he said were from a famous coffee roaster there. He seemed relaxed and happy, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. When he hugged me hello, I stood stiff and unresponsive in his arms. He noticed immediately that something was wrong. Jake had always been good at reading my moods, and he could tell that I was upset about something serious. He asked me what had happened while he was gone, if there was some kind of family emergency or problem at work that was bothering me. I could not stand his fake concern for another second. The anger that had been building up all weekend finally exploded out of me. I told him not to call me honey when he was lying to my face about everything. The confusion in his eyes just made me angrier because I thought he was still trying to deceive me. I went to the kitchen and grabbed all the evidence. I had printed out screenshots of the jewelry websites, photos of the florist pages, and a copy of the restaurant receipt. I threw them down on the coffee table in front of him and demanded that he explain why he was buying expensive jewelry for another woman and taking her to romantic dinners. Jake looked down at the papers with complete bewilderment. He tried to reach for them to get a better look, but I stepped back and told him not to touch me. I asked him how long he had been having an affair and whether he had ever actually loved me or if our entire relationship had been a lie. Jake's face went from confused to hurt as he realized what I was accusing him of. He asked me why I had gone through his computer and his personal belongings, whether I had lost all trust in him after 3 years together. His voice was calm, but I could see the pain in his eyes. I told him that trust was something he had forfeited when he started sneaking around behind my back. I said that I understood perfectly what was going on and that I was not stupid enough to believe whatever lies he was about to tell me. Jake tried to explain that I was misunderstanding everything, but I cut him off. When he stepped closer and tried to take my hand to calm me down, I saw it as manipulation. I thought he was trying to use his charm and our history together to make me doubt what I had seen with my own eyes. The thought of him touching me after he had been touching someone else made me feel sick. That was when I completely lost control. I raised my hand and slapped Jake across the face with every ounce of hurt and anger I was feeling. The sound echoed through our apartment like a gunshot, and the force of it made him stumble backward and put his hand to his cheek. The moment after I hit him, the silence was deafening. Jake stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock hurt and something that looked like disappointment. His voice was quiet when he said that I had actually hit him, like he could not believe what had just happened. I was breathing hard, my hands still tingling from the impact, but my pride would not let me apologize. Instead, I told him that he deserved it for what he had done to us, for destroying our relationship and our future together. I felt justified in my anger, convinced that I was the victim in this situation. Jake bent down and picked up the scattered papers, looking through each one slowly and carefully. As he read, his expression changed from hurt to something else that I could not quite identify. It looked almost like resignation, like he had given up on something important. He finally looked up at me and said that he could not believe I had thought what I was thinking. He said that he could not believe I would jump to such conclusions without even talking to him first. The disappointment in his voice was obvious, and it made me feel uncertain for the first time since I had found the evidence. Jake told me that he needed to get some air and that we would talk when he got back. He grabbed his keys and wallet and headed for the door, leaving me alone in our apartment with the scattered papers and the sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, I had made a terrible mistake. Jake was gone for over 2 hours, and by the time he came back, I could see that he had been crying. His eyes were red and puffy, and he looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with being physically tired. He sat down on the couch across from me and asked if I wanted to know what he had really been doing. Without waiting for my answer, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box that I had never seen before. Inside was the most beautiful antique necklace I had ever seen, with delicate silver filigree and tiny pearls that caught the light perfectly. It was exactly like one I had admired months ago in an antique store window, but I had never told Jake about it. Jake's voice was quiet and broken as he explained each piece of evidence that I had used to convict him of cheating. The expensive jewelry websites were because he had been researching that necklace for weeks, trying to find one exactly like the one I had loved. He had finally found it at an estate sale and bought it as a surprise for our wedding day. The restaurant receipt from Le Bernardin was from a dinner he had with our wedding planner Madison to finalize the details of a surprise reception that he had been organizing for months. He had wanted to add special touches that would make our wedding day perfect, including having the restaurant cater a private dinner for just our immediate family after the main reception. The mysterious Portland trip had actually been to visit my favorite Aunt Margaret, who lived about an hour outside the city. Jake had driven there to personally invite her to our wedding because he knew how much she meant to me, and he wanted to surprise me by having her there. Aunt Margaret had moved there recently, and I had been sad that she might not be able to make the trip for our wedding. All of those late nights at work had been Jake staying behind to make phone calls to vendors and coordinators for the surprise elements of our wedding. He had been planning a surprise honeymoon trip to Italy, the place I had dreamed of visiting since I was a little girl. He had also been working with a florist to create a special entrance decoration that would spell out, "I love you, Yvette," in white roses. The secretive phone calls and text messages had all been with the various people helping him coordinate these surprises. The message about everything set for next weekend was from the surprise coordinator, confirming that all the final details were in place for our wedding, which was supposed to be just 6 weeks away. As Jake explained everything, I felt my world crumbling around me. The man I had accused of betraying me had actually been working for months to make our wedding day the most special day of my life. While I had been suspecting him of having an affair, he had been planning surprises that showed how much he loved me and how well he knew me. But then Jake's expression hardened, and his voice became cold in a way I had never heard before. He told me that despite everything he had planned, despite all the love he had put into trying to make me happy, he could not marry someone who did not trust him. He said that he could not spend his life with someone who would hit him instead of talking to him when there was a problem. Jake stood up and started walking toward our bedroom, saying that he was going to pack a bag and stay at his brother's place for a while. He told me that our wedding was off, that he could not go through with marrying me after what had happened. He said that trust was the foundation of marriage, and without it, we had nothing to build on. I started crying and begging him not to leave, trying to explain that I had been scared of losing him and that my fear had made me act irrationally. I told him about my father leaving when I was 12 and how that had made me terrified of abandonment. But Jake just shook his head and said that none of that excused what I had done. The next few days were a blur of humiliation and regret. I had to call the venue and cancel our reception, return my wedding dress to the bridal shop, and explain to both of our families why the wedding was off. My mother cried when I told her what had happened, and my sister Sarah was so disappointed in me that she barely spoke to me for weeks. Even Amanda, who had supported me when I thought Jake was cheating, pointed out that I should have talked to him before jumping to conclusions. She said that 3 years of trust and love should have counted for more than a few suspicious websites and a restaurant receipt. Her words hurt because I knew she was right. I fell into a deep depression, barely leaving our apartment and calling in sick to work for days at a time. I realized that I had destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too scared and proud to have an honest conversation with the man I loved. Every time I looked at the engagement ring on my finger, I was reminded of what I had lost. After 2 weeks of feeling sorry for myself, I decided that I had to try to fight for our relationship. I could not just give up without trying everything possible to show Jake that I was willing to change and grow from this mistake. I started researching trust issues and communication in relationships, and I made an appointment with a counselor to work on my abandonment fears. I also enrolled in an anger management class because I knew that hitting Jake was completely unacceptable, regardless of how upset I was. I had never been a violent person before, and I was horrified that I had let my emotions control me to that extent. I needed to learn better ways to handle conflict and stress. I wrote Jake a long letter explaining everything I was feeling and everything I was doing to address my problems. I told him about my childhood fears and how they had made me paranoid about losing people I loved. I acknowledged that none of that excused my behavior, but I wanted him to understand where it came from. I planned an elaborate apology that recreated our very first date at the botanical gardens. I brought the same vanilla latte that I had been drinking when we met, and I wore the same blue dress I had worn on our first official date. I even brought a picnic with all of his favorite foods and a handwritten letter explaining how sorry I was. Jake was surprised to see me when I showed up at his office with coffee and flowers. At first, he was resistant to the idea of talking, saying that words were not enough to fix what had been broken between us. But when I showed him the appointment confirmations for counseling and anger management, he could see that I was serious about changing. I asked him to give me one chance to prove that I could be the partner he deserved, someone who would communicate instead of making assumptions. I suggested that we try couples counseling together so we could both learn better ways to handle problems and misunderstandings. Jake agreed to have one coffee with me just to talk about what had happened and whether there was any possibility of moving forward. That single coffee turned into a 3-hour conversation where we both cried and talked about our fears, our mistakes, and our love for each other. Slowly, over the course of several months, we started rebuilding our relationship. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, which turned into weekend walks and movie nights. The couples counseling sessions helped us both understand how to communicate better and how to handle our individual issues without letting them destroy our partnership. Jake learned that his secretive planning style, while well-intentioned, had contributed to my fears and suspicions. I learned that my trust issues stemming from my childhood were something I needed to actively work on rather than just hoping they would go away. We both learned that love alone is not enough without trust and communication. 6 months later, Jake proposed to me again. This time, it was smaller and more intimate, just the two of us in our apartment with takeout Chinese food and the same ring he had given me the first time. When he asked me to marry him again, I said yes, but I also promised him that I would never let fear make my decisions for me again. We got married the following spring in a simple ceremony with just our immediate families present. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding we had originally planned, but it was perfect because it represented our commitment to starting over and doing better. Jake gave me the antique necklace during our ceremony, and I wore it with pride, knowing how much love and forgiveness it represented. The experience taught me that sometimes our biggest mistakes become our greatest teachers. Trust is not just about believing in someone else. It is about believing in yourself enough to communicate your fears instead of acting on them. The love worth fighting for is the love that survives when you show your absolute worst and they still choose to help you become your best. If you have ever made a mistake that almost cost you everything, let me know in the comments below what you learned from it. Have you ever jumped to conclusions instead of having an honest conversation? How did you rebuild trust after breaking it? Please like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories about love and relationships, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that it is possible to come back from even the biggest mistakes. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that communication and trust are the foundations of any strong relationship. May you always choose love over fear and conversation over assumption.